Howdy, my name is Larry Telles. I'd like to welcome you to this presentation. I'll be one of the two hosts that take you through the transition from silent film into the world of sound. I hope you enjoy it.
My name is Michael Aus, and I'm here with Larry to cover those men and women actors who made it through to sound pictures. Unfortunately, a few didn't make it for various reasons. So let's begin.
The transition to talkies was not easy nor simple. Studios had to buy a lot of expensive new equipment and find and hire people who knew how to use them. A studio in a noisy location near traffic or an airport had to soundproof their new building. Some actors with funny sounding voices or heavy accent would not be easy to listen to. These actors would be hard to understand. New actors with good voices had to be found. Old and new actors had to memorize their lines ahead of time. They had to stand still when they spoke so the microphones could pick up their voices. Directors could no longer shout out instruction to the actors while the cameras were rolling. Microphones were not sensitive but could pick up the whirring sound of the nearby cameras. Everyone who made movies had to learn a whole new way of doing their job. Projectionists now had to operate phonographs as well as projectors. A challenge came when the phonograph needle would skip or jump around in the record groove, and synchronization between the sound and the picture would be lost. Many theater musicians were out of a job when the theater installed an expensive sound movie system. How about the audience, Michael?
They had to sit quietly in order to be able to hear the voices of the actors on the screen. Some deaf people might have been able to read the lips of the actors on the screen, but not if that actor turned away from the camera. Dialogue cards were no longer necessary. There wasn't much body language either. Many of the actors had to stand still when they spoke. With less action and more talk, people began to call the new sound movies talkies. There were two big stars that died before they made it to sound.
Art Accord. As a young man, Accord worked as a cowboy and ranch hand, and later won the steer bulldogging World Championship in Pendleton, Oregon, 1912, and repeated as champion in 1916, defeating challenger and friend Hoot Gibson. Started in the motion picture business in 1909 as a stuntman in westerns. Accord made his last film in 1930 and moved to Mexico. He died on January 4th, 1931 in Chihuahua, Mexico. Mexican police officially listed his death as a suicide. Many of his friends over the years insist that he had been murdered by a Mexican politician who caught Accord having an affair with his wife.
Fred Thompson, Thundering Hooves, 1924. On the last day of shooting, Thompson was badly injured while filming a horse-to-horse transfer in the runaway stagecoach scene. Thompson and a horse both fell to the ground during a turn in the path, and the stagecoach, carrying 4 crew members and additional weights to keep it steady, drove over him. The scene was finished by stuntman Yakima Canet, and Thompson's fall was incorporated into the scene. In 1928, Thompson was 38 years old and ready for his transition to talkies. He stepped onto a nail while working in his stables. Contracting tetanus, which the doctors initially misdiagnosed, he died in Los Angeles on Christmas Day, 1928, and his wife, Frances Marion, and 2 young sons survived him. Pallbearers at his funeral included Harold Lloyd, Charles Farrell, Douglas Fairbanks, and honorary pallbearer Buster Keaton. There were 2 Western stars who only made 1 talkie.
Tom Mix started his film career in 1909 and made 11 films with sound. In 1935, at age 55, he made a 15-chapter serial for Mascot Pictures. Mix looked his age. On October 12, 1940, while driving his 1937 Cord Sportsman through the Arizona desert, he took a turn too fast, a suitcase broke loose and struck him in the back of the head, and his car plunged into a ravine. The ravine was later named the Tom Mix Wash in his honor. At his funeral, Rudy Valley sang Empty Saddles.
William Surrey Hart was in the 1907 unauthorized version of Ben-Hur and was not credited. He started making westerns in 1914 and made Tumbleweeds in 1925. Then, in 1928, he was in Show People and again not credited. He was a friend of the legendary Wyatt Earp. Along with fellow silent movie cowboy star Tom Mix, he was a pallbearer at Earp's funeral in 1929. The 1939 reissued version of Tumbleweeds was preceded by an 8-minute sound prologue with Hart introducing the film. This was the only film in which you heard Hart's voice. Two-Gun Bill, as he had been nicknamed, passed away June 23, 1946, and is buried in Newhall, California.
William Boyd found work in Hollywood as an extra in the silent era. During World War I, he enlisted, but was exempt from military service because of a weak heart. More film roles followed, including his breakout role in a Cecil B. DeMille film. Boyd's performance in the film was praised by critics, while moviegoers were equally impressed by his easy charm, charisma, and intense good looks. DeMille cast him as a leading man in a silent drama film, which now established him as a matinee idol and romantic leading man. The studio ended Boyd's contract in 1931 when his picture was mistakenly run in a newspaper story about the arrest of another actor, William Stage Boyd, on gambling and liquor charges. Although the newspaper apologized, explaining the mistake in the following day's newspaper, Boyd said the damage was already done. William Stage Boyd died in 1935, the same year that William L. Boyd became Hopalong Cassidy, the role that led him to his enduring fame. But at the time in 1931, Boyd was virtually broke and without a job, and for a few years he was credited in films as Bill Boyd to prevent being mistaken for the other William Boyd.
Yakima Canet. Enos Edward Canet was born in Colfax, Washington. He later adopted the nickname Yakima after the Yakima River Valley in Washington. He broke a wild bronco when he was 11. As a 6-foot-tall, 16-year-old, he started bronco riding at the Whitman County Fair in Colfax in 1912. And at 17, he won the title of the world's best bronco buster. Canet got his first taste of stunt work in the fight scene on a serial called Lightning Bryce. Douglas Fairbanks and Canet became friends when Fairbanks used some of Canet's tricks in a film. It was while working on mascot serials that Canet practiced and perfected his most famous stunts. He would use some of the tricks in John Ford's 1939 Stagecoach. He did hundreds of stunts for all the major studios. On May 24, 1986, Yakima Canet died of cardiac arrest at the age of 90.
George Cheeseborough was born July 29, 1888, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He joined a traveling stock theater which toured Asia for 2 years. George began in films in 1915 and worked for various companies like Universal and Triangle. In 1919, he appeared in at least 4 Texas Guinan films, including south o Santa Fe as the sheriff. Of his 428 film appearances, only 47 were in the silent era. The rest were all soundies, mostly Western. George passed away in 1959 in Los Angeles, just shy of his 71st birthday.
Franklin Farnham was born William Smith on June 5, 1878, in Boston, Massachusetts. He began his career at age 12 on the vaudeville circuit. He came to Hollywood in 1916, working for Universal, Rex, and Metro Studios. In 1919, he starred in a series for Canyon Pictures. During the sound era, he continued appearing in both westerns and dramas, often uncredited, but also appeared in TV series such as Cheyenne, Perry Mason, Have Gun Will Travel, and Rawhide. Farnham died July 4, 1961. He completed 562 credits to his name in the IMDb, but appeared in at least 1,100 films. He was also cast in more films that won the Academy Award for Best Picture than any other performer in American film industry. Franklin Farnham was not related to Dustin or William Farnham.
Al Hoxie, born Alton J. Stone. His career was much overshadowed by that of his more famous brother, Jack Hoxie. He grew up in the backwoods and mountains of Idaho. Following in his brother's footsteps, Al Stone moved to Los Angeles, not yet 21 years old, and changed his last name to Hoxie. He worked as a stuntman and double for his brother in numerous films in the early 1920s. A Poverty Row studio called Anchor Films saw potential in a cowboy with a famous last name. They signed him to play the lead in a series of westerns. None of these pictures ventured beyond being mediocre, and with the coming of sound in the late 1920s, Hoxie, with no great following, quit the business. In Los Angeles, he worked as a conductor on the Red Line streetcars. For a few years, he was a forest ranger and then into law enforcement, first for the Anaheim, California Police Department, and then for the Patton State Hospital. Al Hoxie died in Redlands, California in 1982.
Jack Hoxie, also Hart Hoxie, started in silence with Pathé, then signed with the Kalem Company. At that studio, he appeared in several Hazards of Helen episodes. Born John Stone, he changed his name to Hartford Hoxie, then to Art Hoxie. By 1921, Hoxie was successful enough to catch the eye of Universal Pictures, which hired him. His career faded quickly after sound. He looked like a cowboy, but his skills did not extend to sounding like one since he could barely read. By the end of the 1930s, he had retired. He died in Kansas in 1965 at the age of 80.
Buck Jones worked as a cowboy with the 101 Ranch after his military service. While in Los Angeles, he got a job as a bit player and stuntman with Universal. Next was Canyon Pictures and then to Fox Film Corporation. His voice, a rugged baritone, recorded well, and the films were very successful. Jones starred in Western features and serials for Columbia and Universal Pictures. His final series of Western features, co-produced by Jones for Monogram Pictures, featured the Rough Riders trio, Buck Jones, Tim McCoy, and Raymond Hatton. There's still a controversy about his death. Buck Jones was one of the 492 victims of the Coconut Grove Fire in Boston, Massachusetts, on November 28, 1942. He passed away 2 days later, on November 30th, at age 50.
Tom Keene was born George Duria and later studied at Columbia University before embarking on an acting career. He made his film debut in a 1923 film directed by Cecil B. DeMille. He did not have a large following as a result of his Western films, and remained a second-string, less identifiable Western star for the duration of his career. He left Hollywood for a time and returned to the minor studios such as Monogram and Republic Studios in cowboy garb in need of work. In 1944, Tom changed his name once again to Richard Powers in the last juncture of his career, which couldn't have helped. He retired in the late 1950s and focused on real estate and insurance businesses. Tom died of cancer in 1963.
Ken Maynard made a successful transition to talking pictures and became the movie's first singing cowboy. In 1934, he was hired for a serial, Mystery Mountain, and planned to make a series of Western features with Maynard. However, Maynard's possible alcoholism cost him the job. He was replaced by Gene Autry. He kept working in Hollywood, but in smaller productions, until 1940. Maynard returned to the screen in 1943 for low-budget Monogram Pictures in a series called The Trailblazers. In retirement, he lived a desolate life as an alcoholic in a rundown trailer. During these years, Maynard was supported by an unknown benefactor, long thought to be Gene Autry. More than 25 years after his first starring role, Maynard returned to the screen in two small roles in Bigfoot, 1970, and The Marshal of Windy Hollow, filmed in 1972 but never released. Maynard died of stomach cancer in 1973 at the Motion Picture Home in Woodland Hills, California. Ken Maynard wasn't a singing cowboy like Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, Eddie Dean, or Tex Ritter. He was the first. Ken Maynard sang the Cowboys' Lament in Universal Picture hit talkie, The Wagon Master. Ken Maynard's silent version was released on September 8, 1929. In this movie, Maynard is succeeded by John Wayne as Singin' Sammy Saunders in Riders of Destiny in 1933, and Gene Autry followed singing in film in 1934.
I come out of Austin's fair city, old Austin's fair city, old Austin's fair city. 'Twas early one day. I spied a young cowboy, a handsome young cowboy, all dressed in white linen and cold as the clay. I see by your outfit that you are a cowboy. These words he did say as I boldly stepped by. Come sit down beside me and hear my sad story, for I'm shot in the breast and I know I must die. Oh, beat the drum slowly, oh, play the fife lowly, oh, play the dead march as they carry me along. Carry me to the graveyard and pour the sod o'er me, for I'm only a poor cowboy and I know I've done wrong. My friends and relations, they live in the nation, they know not where their boy has gone. First came to Texas and hired to a ranchman. No, I'm only a poor cowboy and I know I've done wrong. Someone write a letter to my gray-headed mother, and then to my sister so dear. But there's another far dearer than mother who'd bitterly weep if she knew I were here. Oh, beat the drum slowly, oh, play the fife slowly, oh, play the dead march as they carry me along. Carry me to the graveyard and pour the sod o'er me, for I'm only a poor cowboy and I know I've done wrong. Oh, beat the drum lowly, oh, play the fife slowly, oh, play the dead march as they carry me along. Carry me to the graveyard and pour the sod o'er me, for I'm only a poor cowboy and I know I've done wrong. Oh, once in the saddle I used to go dashing, oh, once in that saddle I used to ride gay. But I just took to drinking and then to card playing, got shot by a gambler, am dying today. Someone go bring me a glass of cold water, a glass of cold water, the poor cowboy said. But ere we could get it, his soul had departed, his soul had departed, the cowboy was dead. Oh, beat the drum lowly, oh, play the fife slowly, oh, play the dead march as they carry me along. Carry me to the graveyard and pour the sod o'er me, for I'm only a poor cowboy and I know I've done wrong.
Kermit Maynard was born in 1897 and the look-alike younger brother of actor Ken Maynard. They were frequently assumed to be identical twins. Often billed as Tex Maynard early in his career, he appeared in 280 films between 1927 and 1962. In the mid to late 30s, Maynard starred in films produced by Ambassador Pictures, a Maurice Kahn company that began operations in 1934. He starred in 18 Ambassador films in 1935 to 1937. After the last of those, Roaring Six Guns, he resumed doing stunt work and acting in supporting roles. On January 16, 1971, Maynard died at his home in North Hollywood from a heart attack. He was 72 years old.
Tim McCoy, one of the great stars of early American Western. McCoy was born in Michigan. After seeing a Wild West show there, left school and found work on a Wyoming ranch. He became an expert horseman and roper and developed a keen knowledge of the ways and languages of the Indian tribes in the area. In 1922, he was asked by the head of famous Players Lasky to provide Indian extras for a Western extravaganza, The Covered Wagon, 1923. He resigned from the state position and recruited several hundred Indians to the Utah movie location. MGM Speedy signed him to a contract to star in a series of westerns, and McCoy rapidly rose to stardom in later years as a retired rancher. He died at the U.S. Army Hospital at Fort Waukechua, Arizona, on January 29, 1978, at the age of 86.
George O'Brien. O'Brien came to Hollywood in his early 20s, hoping to become a cameraman, and worked as an assistant cameraman for a while for both Tom Mix and Buck Jones. He began his acting career in bit parts and as a stuntman. He was chosen by the famed movie director John Ford to star in The Iron Horse. During World War II, O'Brien enlisted in the United States Navy and was decorated several times. He left service with the rank of commander. O'Brien would occasionally take featured parts in films directed by his old friend and mentor, John Ford. He made westerns from 1922 to 1964. O'Brien suffered a stroke in 1981 and was bedridden for the last 4 years of his life. He died in 1985 in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma.
Jack Perrin's first on-screen appearance was in the 1917 film with Harold Lloyd. During the 1920s, Perrin made a name for himself, starring in a number of films. Perrin found a niche in the B-movie westerns of the 1930s. Perrin's last major role was in 1937. Although he continued making films through 1960, many of his later roles were minor and often went uncredited. He died in July 12, 1985.
Jack Richardson was born November 18, 1870, in New York City. He appeared in at least 563 films in both the silent and sound eras. His first appearance was in Strategy, 1911, for American Film Manufacturing Company, aka the Flying A. He also continued working there for 320 films, mostly westerns. Leaving the Flying A, he worked for Bison, Triangle, and Froman Amusement, where he appeared in Texas Guinan Westerns, often as a heavy, including in South of Santa Fe as the cheating husband of the ranch owner. During the sound era, many of his 117 roles were uncredited as spectators, drunks, and detectives. His last appearance was in 1954's The Egyptian. He passed away in Los Angeles in 1960 at the age of 89.
Buddy Roosevelt, born as Kenneth Stanhope Sanderson, he started performing as a stuntman in 1916. After World War I, Roosevelt returned to Hollywood to perform stunts in films as notable as The Sheik. In 1939, he both performed stunts and had a minor role in the classic Stagecoach. His career was interrupted again during World War II when he enlisted in the Coast Guard. In the 1950s, he appeared in 65 episodes as an unnamed townsman on The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp. He retired in 1962, with his last appearance being uncredited, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. He passed away on October 6, 1973, at the age of 75. Next, we have the two who were most popular after making the transition to talkies.
Charles Sterrett was hired as an extra in 1926 while attending Dartmouth College. Bitten by the acting bug, Sterrett played in minor roles in films. He was in 2 films in 1933 and helped organize the Screen Actors Guild. In 1935, Columbia Pictures wanted to replace Tim McCoy with a younger actor. Sterrett heard about this and interviewed with Columbia Pictures. Sterrett ultimately signed 4 contracts with Columbia, becoming the studio's #1 cowboy star. He cast an appealing figure with his tall stature, 6'2", strong jawline, and an air of quiet authority. When Sterrett retired at age 48, he held the record for starring in the longest-running string of feature films, 131 titles, half of them being Durango Kid films for Columbia Pictures. After his retirement, Columbia serviced the still strong demand for Sterrett by reissuing his 1937 to 1940 westerns with the Sons of the Pioneers. These proved just as popular as the Durango series, and Columbia kept dozens of the Sterrett features in theaters for several years. Sterrett died in 1986, 6 days short of his 83rd birthday.
Harry Carey, in 1911, with the help of actor Henry B. Walthall, Carey became part of the Biograph stock company. He began appearing in films for director D.W. Griffith. He would eventually appear in almost 250 films and became a big star in silent westerns. In 1915, he signed with Universal. Carey developed signature gestures such as the way he sat on a horse, a semi-slouch with his elbows resting on the saddle horn. By the end of the decade, Carey was one of the highest-paid Western stars. He had a face and a body that could express emotion. Trained as it was in the silent picture, but almost had a voice that registered strongly on film. Carey won an Academy Award nomination for his performance as a vice president in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington in 1939. Henry DeWitt Carey II died on September 21st, 1947.
Hoot Gibson, born Edmund Richard Gibson, was an American rodeo champion and a film actor, film director, and producer. When he wasn't acting and doing stunt work, he went back to the rodeo. Gibson made the transition from silent films to sound. Between World War I and World War II, he was second only to cowboy film legend Tom Mix as a box office draw. Gibson made his first film in 1910, another in 1911 and 1912. Making movies was a minor sideline. He continued competing in rodeos to make a living. From the 1920s through the 1940s, Hoot Gibson was a major film attraction. His high living and poor investments didn't help his retirement. He had squandered much of his income. Hoot Gibson died of cancer in 1962 in Woodland Hills, California.
Helen Gibson was born Rose August Winger in Cleveland, and her father had wanted a son and encouraged her to be a tomboy. Rose saw her first Wild West show in the summer of 1909 and answered a Miller's Brothers 101 ranch ad. When the show suddenly closed in 1911, it left many performers stranded in Venice, California. Thomas H. Entz hired the entire cast for the winter. She made 2 films. Later she partnered with Hoot Gibson, married him, and headed for Hollywood. She replaced Helen Holmes in the series The Hazards of Helen. Rose Gibson became Helen Gibson. She went to Universal, then Capitol, to make films. Helen left work with the circus and returned to work in talkies, and also became the first professional stuntwoman in Hollywood. She retired from films in 1962 and passed away in Oregon in 1977.
Mary Louise Cecilia Texas Guinan was born in Texas in 1884 and was an American actress, producer, and entrepreneur. Working as a chorus girl, she adopted the stage name Texas Guinan. A year later, she had the female lead in a stage production. Her film career began in 1917 and continued through 1933. Triangle Film Corporation featured Guinan in 4 feature films between 1917 and 1918, when she moved into the Western movie genre. Guinan was again seen on the screen with 2 sound pictures, playing slightly fictionalized versions of herself as a speakeasy proprietress. At Bullseye Productions, also Reelcraft, Guinan began to expand towards the production and filmmaking. She died November 5th, 1933.
From silent film comedian to westerns. One silent film comedian who became a cowboy sidekick. Al St. John. He entered silent films in 1912 and soon rose to co-starring and starring roles in short comic films from a variety of studios. When Roscoe Arbuckle formed his own production company, he brought St. John with him and recruited stage star Buster Keaton into his films. During the sound era, St. John was mainly seen as an increasingly scruffy and bearded comic character. That same year, he began supporting cowboy stars Fred Scott and later Jack Randall, but most of his films were made for Poverty Row Studios Producers Releasing Corp., PRC. For that studio, he played Fuzzy Q. Jones in the Billy the Kid series starring Bob Steele, the Lone Rider series starring George Houston and later Bob Livingston, and the Billy the Kid, Billy Carson series starring Buster Crabbe. St. John's last film was released in 1952. He acted in 346 movies spanning 5 decades, from 1912 to 1952. He was working with a traveling Wild West show in Georgia when he was waiting to go on when he suffered a massive heart attack and died at age 70. Well, there you have it. Those Western stars, both men and women, that made a transition from silent film to talkies. I do hope you enjoyed it.
Also on the museum's YouTube channel, you can find Desert Rat starring Franklin Farnham, who we've recently talked about, and 2 Texas Guinan films, South of Santa Fe, which has Jack Richardson and George Cheeseborough in them, and a 2-reel version of Girl of the Rancho. Hope you enjoy them.